Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.
Hello, my name is Eric Schein. This program is In the Zone, and today's topic is impeachment. And today I have a very special guest. I have the author of Impeach the President, the case against Bush and Cheney, and the esteemed associate professor, Dennis Liu, who is an award-winning sociologist and associate professor at Cal State Polytechnic University in Pomona. Welcome to the show. And he's here to talk about his book and about impeachment.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks for being here. So tell the listeners about impeachment, why it's absolutely necessary, why it's a good thing for the country, for the health of the republic, if not to, I guess, save the world, and I hate to put it in such dire light, from an imperial presidency.
Well, you've had a chance to read part of the book we met last night. As you know...
And that was at Emmanuel Presbyterian, which is a focal point here in Los Angeles for much activity and much organizing and many events like what you were involved in last night with John Nichols, and he's written a book also on impeachment.
Right, called The Genius of Impeachment.
Right.
There are several books on impeachment at this point.
Many, actually.
Yeah,
Their list
about
is growing.
7 or 8.
But
yeah.
yours is the best that I've seen, and the footnotes.
Thank you.
The footnotes are extensive.
Yes.
At the end of each chapter, I mean, you spent a lot of time. I don't know why you're only an associate professor. You could probably shed us a little light on that, and why you're not a professor, because the short time that I've had to spend with the book, I'm amazed. I'm very well, impressed with what you've done.
Thank you. I'm very proud of the footnotes, actually.
well,
because they're very substantive.
Right.
You have the opportunity not only to show where these things, to find out where this information came from, but you can also explore more in depth.
Well, you're backing up your opinion and what you say in the book with evidence.
Yes.
And it's evidence that's out in the public domain that you can find on the internet, in books. John Dean, worse than Watergate. He was chief counsel for Nixon,
yes,
or House counsel.
Yeah.
And he's saying, he's actually testified. I think you have that in here, or mentioned it about his testimony before Congress recently. I think it was last year. I'm trying to think of where I just recently seen that. Maybe it wasn't in here. But he's gone in and said, you guys need to do something and do it quickly, because this is gravely serious.
It's extremely serious. What we're facing in this country is unprecedented in our history. What this administration, or what I prefer to call the Bush-Cheney regime, really, because they were never legitimately elected,
right,
either in 2000 or in 2004. This White House is fundamentally restructuring the nature of what it means to be an American and what America is in the world.
Or what a republic is, because it's not really a republic anymore. It's much more analogous to a monarchy.
Well, yeah, let me cite
Article 52, or was it Article
51?
51,
right. This May 9th, the White House, with little fanfare, released National Security Presidential Directive 51.
Right.
Which is a matching piece to the Warner Act, which was signed by Bush in October of 2006.
Which is the Defense Authorization Bill?
It's, yeah, John Warner Defense Authorization Bill of 2007
right,
is its full title. And that, together with this Article 51, which is a presidential directive, not an act of law,
right,
but a presidential directive.
Like an executive order.
Exactly.
And there's many that precede this, that go back through Kennedy. I mean, and you can keep going back. Right now, I think the executive order that created the Department of Homeland Security is number 13,228. That means there's been, and it's actually over, I think it's over 14,000 now, 13,000 plus up to the point of the creation of Homeland Security in 2003. I think that was shortly right after. Was it? No, it was sooner than that. Was it short? It was right after 9/11,
yeah,
wasn't it?
it was maybe 2002, 2003. I don't remember exactly right now.
But that's 13,000 plus executive orders, and more have been written under this presidency than I think all other presidencies combined.
By far.
Yeah.
Yeah, executive orders, presidential directives, signing statements. Signing statements predate Bush and Cheney, but most of those were pro forma. They were, flowery language on the legislation when the president signed it, which is not what Bush is doing.
But they were to set policy, to take the law as set by Congress and to move resources and manpower to affect the law. And not only on the federal side and or state side, on the public side, but also on the private side. But it would leave it to some respect up to the corporations and more, saying, look, this is what you're going to have to do. This is how you're going to have to follow it. How you do it, as long as you comply, and that's why we had many of the different executive branch administrations, SEC and more, to make sure that the private sector was also compliant with the law, because the law is supposed to apply to both sides. And those executive orders were intended to apply the law written by Congress, but now there's been a break with the unitary government and more, to where now Congress is somehow not only a branch unto itself, it's basically become a tree unto itself. The same with the executive branch. This goes into unitary government. And then also the same thing with the judiciary, which is not how our republic was established. Separation of powers.
Yes, well, the Howard Zinn, in the introduction of our book here, Impeach the President, points out that the balance of powers between the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative, Congress on the federal level, has never really been all that operative, particularly when we talk about foreign policy. But what we are seeing with this White House is a tremendous acceleration and an explicit, in fact, embracing de jure as well as de facto, by law and in practice, of this unitary executive doctrine, which comes from the Federalist Society, right?
Right.
Which is that the president and his people have the right to make law as they see fit, and to ignore the law as it's been passed by Congress.
And then expect that Congress will come in ipso facto after the fact and change the law, like Warner and Specter and others have said, no, just tell us, and we'll go ahead and change the law to give you whatever you need.
Well, that's what happened with the Military Commissions Act
and
of
FISA
2006.
and more.
Yes, exactly. Well, FISA, the 1978 FISA Act,
Right.
Yeah, that's the thing that John Dean was talking about. He made the statement that in the 1978 FISA Act, which was passed to do two things. One, to prevent the abuses, the wiretapping, the surveillance that was being conducted under the Nixon administration.
And
right?
before, even Hoover and more.
Yeah, well, they were caught red-handed with
Right.
this, right? So they passed this to require that if the federal government, the NSA, National Security Agency, or the CIA, and et cetera, wanted to conduct surveillance, that they would have to go to a court and provide evidence as to why they had to do this. And the court...
That's constitutional.
It's constitutional. The court has almost, in I think about 3 or 4 cases, have turned them down in the past. And they have retroactive provisions that they can go after.
72 hours, even up to 2 weeks, I think.
2 weeks, 15 days. They
Right.
can go after the fact and request permission for something they've already done if they were really pressed for time.
Right.
So that was one of the objectives, to allow them to curb the abuse.
To separate the powers, so that at some point the executive branch is enforcing the law, but they're doing it through the judiciary. Like, even to get a warrant, they have to go to a court and justify and say, look, this is why we want the warrant. We have this evidence, we have this, we have this. And you have somebody who's supposedly independent, but we've seen the complete breakdown of separation of powers, to where the executive branch, the president, the lead executive officer, is appointing ex-executive officers from not only the corporate side, but even the governmental side, to the judiciary.
Yeah, well, let me just quickly go over a few
Sure.
things so that people have a fairly coherent picture of what's going on here. So the FISA Act, when Bush was caught violating this,
Right.
he was caught red-handed. There's 2 parts to this. The first time he was caught, they were caught and they said, well, we're only doing a few people, and we're only surveilling without warrants those people who are doing international calls
Right.
between somebody who is a suspected terrorist and somebody else. Right?
Then it was revealed.
And then a few months later it was revealed that in fact it wasn't, through another whistleblower in San Francisco,
Right.
who worked for AT&T.
Right.
And he found out that it wasn't just a few thousand or a few hundred calls, it wasn't just international calls, it was tens of millions of Americans' calls, domestic and international. So they were
And
caught
even
red-handed.
just domestic.
They were called red-handed.
Right.
And then Bush, admitted, oh yes, actually I am doing it, but I'm doing it to protect your interests.
Right.
Because we're in a war with terror.
National security.
And I want to cite here a very short quote that starts the preface of our book. And it goes like this. The people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. All we have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger.
Right.
And this is said by Hermann Goering,
Right.
Luftwaffe
Nazi.
commander and Nazi leader.
Well, and that goes into even the Milgram experiments.
Yes, we talked in
about
the preface about the
Germans.
Milgram experiment, which was done in 1960. And people may not know the name Milgram offhand, but if I describe this experiment, they'll recognize
Right.
it. Most people will. This was where they testing to see if people would administer shocks to somebody in another room for giving the wrong answer, and how the scale went from here all the way over to here with triple X on the end, extreme danger.
Right.
Right. And this Milgram, Stanley Milgram, was checking to see. This was meant as a pilot test. He was going to take it to Germany because his hypothesis was that there was something about the Germans that made them more obedient. And allowed them to let somebody like Hitler
Well, his
come to
experiments
power.
were run in what year?
1960
Here in the United States.
at Yale.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he took it into the city,
Right.
to another part of it. And shockingly,
No pun intended.
no pun
sorry.
intended, he discovered that Americans, were all too obedient and were willing to shock a stranger who was screaming towards the latter stages of this experiment that I have a heart condition, stop, I want out. And nearly everybody, he had to modify the experiment tremendously to get anybody to disobey, to stop doing this.
Well, there were the few rogue apples that did for whatever reason, and they were...
Towards the latter part of this, but in the initial stages of the design of this study, nobody disobeyed.
Which is scary.
Which is very scary. So he never took the experiment to Germany because, as I
Did he
point
need
out,
to?
he didn't
It's
need
like,
to, right? That people will obey, particularly if you're talking about something like the government, as opposed to, say, somebody in a white coat in the room,
Right.
The government, with the powers that they have to persuade people, to intimidate people, to censor information, they have an enormous amount of power to influence what people will do, what they think is going on.
But most people are good, honest, decent people.
Most people are.
But you throw them into a sewer, and they come up smelling like the sewer. And at some point, the environment that we're living here within the United States, with what's going on in the bigger picture, and even in our own Civil War, we had families, brothers acting against brothers, family members against family members.
Well, people are afraid of terrorism, for legitimate reasons, right? It was a terrible thing when people saw the World Trade Centers coming down.
Right.
So people were frightened, but the thing about this is that the war on terror, this so-called war on terror, is a so-called war on terror.
But wasn't that name and even terrorism used by Hitler? Didn't they use that actual term, the terrorists?
Excuse me. One of the things that Hitler writes in Mein Kampf is his magnum opus.
Right.
I'm going to paraphrase here because it's very relevant.
Right.
He said, most people in their day-to-day lives will tell small lies because
human nature.
It's human. It's social lubricant, right? You don't tell people the truth all the time.
Right.
But most people don't understand how anyone can tell gigantic lies and still do it.
Right.
They just can't, because they won't do it themselves. They won't tell gigantic lies like weapons of mass destruction in another country.
Right.
Right.
And we need to go to war to stop it.
And we need to go to war to stop it when in
Right.
fact there's no relationship between Iraq and 9/11.
Or Al-Qaeda
and
Iraq.
Exactly. Al-Qaeda
Right.
was not in Iraq.
15 of the 19 terrorists were from Saudi Arabia and more.
Exactly. So what Hitler said was that if you tell massive lies, even if you are caught red-handed, people in the ordinary day-to-day life will have a hard time accepting that they've actually been fooled, because they cannot understand why people would tell massive lies. So the conclusion of this in this passage I'm citing from Hitler is that you can get away with it.
Right.
If you tell lies often enough, loudly enough,
And don't stop.
you know, and you keep it simple, stupid, right?
Right.
Then a lot of people will still go along because they cannot believe that people could be so craven.
But they also want to be well
deceitful.
informed, and they hear this and they want to pass it on and seem like they're well informed, so they get it from Fox News.
Yes.
That's spelled F-A-U-X, right?
Yes. Faux news, yes.
Yeah, right. And other places that are putting out literally propaganda. Armstrong Williams, who's being paid by DOD, even to the point now where the Federalist Society has a program, and there's not much disclosure on this, but it will be breaking out even with Alberto Gonzalez and much of the other stuff going on, called legal warfare or lawfare, to where they're actually paying and using U.S. Treasury dollars. I mean, look at what's going on. Lieutenant Wattada. That situation should have been an administrative remedial adjudication. He said he would serve in Afghanistan. His commanding officer should have said, fine, sure, go. Kept their mouths shut, let him go, don't let anybody else know so that he doesn't become a target by those who think they have marching orders.
Right.
He goes, serves, no problem. That's the cheapest, quickest, easiest way to do it. But instead, we have commanding officers who will attack and try to make a federal case out of it and use precious U.S. Treasury dollars in the time of war on terror supposedly, rather than allowing this individual to just go ahead and serve. And they want to put him in prison through the administrative executive process, not through the judiciary. They don't want to allow him into the judiciary and do so and put him in prison for 4 to 6 years, where we will pay for his imprisonment also. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
And, you know, and Aaron Wattada was a man of principle, is a man of principle, and he fought his orders when he realized that he was going to go and fight a war in Iraq that was, you know, he would be required by his superiors to commit war crimes. And that's one of the things that we talk a lot about in this book.
Right.
We talk about how our soldiers have been ordered and are being ordered on a daily basis to commit war crimes.
Under the threat of imprisonment if they don't.
Well, yeah, court-martial and so on, right? And even more drastic kinds of things. You have people being sent to Iraq.
Right.
Iran is coming, right? They have plans to attack Iran.
Well, look at Iraq is here, Afghanistan is here, and Iran is right in the middle.
But we have people, you know, the soldier, a Marine who was in first time in combat, and he said, you know, well, what are the rules of engagement? You know, what are the rules of engagement? And his superior said, you see someone who looks like the enemy, shoot him. And he says, I've never been outside of the United States.
Right.
I've never been to this country before. Everyone looks like the enemy to me, right? So those are the rules.
And that is the point.
That is the point,
right?
And torture, right? Torture being used on innocents, being used under the justification, right? According to the UN Charter, according to the Geneva Conventions, torture is never justified under any circumstances.
Right.
Now you have shows like Fox's 24 Hours,
right.
24, right? That on primetime television, and this is one of the indicators of the kind of situation we are in this country, they are selling to the American people the notion that torture is justified under the ticking bomb theory, right? That if something is about to happen, then you have to do this to save lives.
Right.
Well, in fact, as I point out in chapter 5 in my book, there has not been a single prosecution of a terrorist as a result of interrogation of somebody.
Well, look at it.
The use of torture.
Atta and all the other individuals that they've actually put into isolation, and I mean to the point of sensory deprivation, to where they're not even sure if they're competent to stand trial now because of their own incarceration.
Oh, you said Atta. Actually,
and not Atta, I'm thinking of
Padilla?
Padilla, right.
Jose Padilla, right, a U.S.
right.
citizen.
But Atta is the same. I mean, they're not, they're supposed to, and in a timely fashion, because it goes towards waste, fraud, abuse, and gross mismanagement of our, system, to hold and detain these people, that at some point, if we bring them to trial in a timely fashion, it lets the light of day in, If there are valid charges and they've done something, then prosecute them for a violation of law, rule, or regulation, or let them go so that we're not paying for it and they're not paying for it.
Let me, if I may, Eric, let me talk a little bit, because I know we only have half an hour in this show. Let me talk a little bit about the contents of the book, and address your original question a little more fully here, and why this is such an important book, and why this is such an important issue. All the other impeachment books are excellent, but what we do in this book that the other ones don't do is we talk not only about what they've been doing, what this White House has been doing, but why they have been doing it, and why they've been getting away with it, and what we need to do about this. A lot of people are very disturbed, and rightly so, that the Democratic Party, particularly the Democratic leadership, despite now being the majority in Congress, have given, and being elected on the express
carte blanche,
purpose to
get us
end
out of
this
the war,
war in Iraq. They just gave Bush more money than he even asked for, with no strings attached.
Well, and people need to be clear, in the defense bill, we have budgetary projections and more, just like a business or anyone else. He's given so much money at the beginning of the year that he requests for the different departments and agencies.
Let's not...
Well, but I was going to say, but the additional funding, the $100 billion plus, was beyond. That was emergency spending to keep the war going.
Yes.
That they didn't even have to vote on or address.
So why is this going on? Why is the Democratic Party, right?
And the Republicans.
Why are they, well, of course the Republicans, right? Why are they going along with this? Why are they going along with torture? The Warner Act that I mentioned earlier in this show, which I didn't actually talk about, let me mention it right now. It's a martial law enabling act. When I speak before audiences, and I've given a lot of talks, and I ask people if they've heard of the Warner Act, almost invariably, either nobody raises their hand or one or two. It's very rare that anyone has even heard of the Warner Act. But what is this Warner Act? It overrides posse comitatus, which means you can, it allows the president to take control over National Guard units to conduct mass detentions, arrests, deportations, whatever, and he's accountable to no one. He can declare a public emergency. According to the Warner Act, he's supposed to confer with a few Congress members about what he's doing and why he's doing it. In his signing statement, he says, I reserve the right not to confer with anybody. There's a word for that. That's a dictatorship. It's a dictatorship, right? And they're doing it under the signboard of the war on terror, that we have to do these kinds of things. National security. But if you look at this administration's record, and we talk about this extensively.
You go across the board, voting, Katrina, 9/11, they had an extraordinary amount of information before 9/11 that they did nothing about. They knew that they had intelligence that other nations were giving them, warning them of impending attacks, that the World Trade Center specifically was a target. They had suspects in hand. They did nothing with them. Well,
they didn't notify NORAD.
Exactly. Well, the stand
They didn't do anything at airports.
They had games going on at the very same time that mirrored exactly what happened that day, and it's in the 911 Commission report. So it's not that this stuff isn't out there.
It isn't, but it's true.
Well,
this is out there. It is out there. But the thing is, in the mainstream corporate media, what is out there, we draw upon a fair amount of that in this book, and the evidence that we put. But the difference is that when they present that, they put it's disparate, it's all over the place, and they don't put it together in a way that's coherent and meaningful. So that's
so they can put it out, lay everything out, tell the truth, literally, basically,
in parts,
here and there, where people aren't putting the bigger pieces of the puzzle together because they don't either.
And that's one of the reasons that we put this book together, because people really need to understand very fully what is going on, how we're being betrayed, the road that we're being taken down here.
Which is identical to, and people don't want to address it, but what happened to not only Germany, and that was a republic, but even the USSR, which also was a republic. Forget about ideologies, forget about socialism or national, Hitler was the National Socialist Party or whatever.
He was a fascist.
Exactly, thank you. And that's exactly the same thing that's going on here. Doesn't matter if you call yourself capitalist, communist, socialist,
Democrat,
individualist, Democrat, Republic. This is about the very same thing that they've used to build up and tear down one republic after another to steal all the treasury assets of that republic and then skate out of town.
Well, there's something very momentous underway here, and one of the things I talk about in the book here is that over the last 30 or so years, right, in the early 1970s, the radical right wing laid plans to transform the political atmosphere in this country, and the keystone to that strategy was building a right-wing media empire,
right.
Fox News, Clear Channel, et al. And they've spent tens of billions of dollars on it, and they've been wildly successful. Because, you know, Bush, for example, could strangle somebody to death on the White House lawn in front of live cameras, and within a few minutes you probably have somebody on Fox News go on, Brit Hume or somebody, saying that was a body double.
Or the president was attacked,
the president
and
really
the president
didn't do it.
saved the nation because, you know, yeah, no, and they would just spin it
Right.
any way they would, because
Right.
all they have to do is tell a lie, keep telling the lie, keep telling it often enough, and then get another media group over here, Clear Channel, or,
Yeah.
I mean, GE owns NBC.
Yes.
Westinghouse owns CBS.
Well,
Disney.
there's a handful, literally, of major media corporations today, which is a dramatically different situation. But here's another thing that's really important before we end the show, is that a majority of American people, despite this, despite all of the distortions and twisted stories and lies and censorship, because the crimes and malfeasances of this government are so egregious,
Right.
right, and they're so blatant.
Right.
Even people who have not been paying a tremendous amount of attention to what's going on realize that this government has got to go.
Well,
In 58% in a January of '07 poll that Newsweek published, right, for example, 58% saying we want this administration gone.
Right.
But why hasn't it happened yet? It's not because the people. It's not because of the people, because the demand for that is there.
Right.
And that's one of the things we talk about in this book. Why is the Democratic Party and why is the mainstream media standing in the way? They're like that Dutch boy in that fable of sticking their finger in the
Right,
dike,
right.
to prevent the flood.
Right.
And so this book and the efforts of groups like World Can't Wait and so on are designed to unleash the people, because we have no other hope in the face of what's going on here unless and until the people act, and it comes from the grassroots.
yeah, you got
We
it.
have
I
to
mean,
change the atmosphere.
we're in the
political
last
atmosphere in
couple
this country.
seconds, so is there anything else just you want to tag on or put on there, or ways?
I would say that we are in a critical situation today in this country and for the world. Every single day that this administration is still in office, not only do they set a precedent for the next administration, but global warming is not being dealt with, and every single day more people are being tortured, and it's immoral.
Well, and it's not just going on overseas, it's going on here in the United States.
Exactly.
I thank you for being here for
You're
the
welcome.
show. I look to finishing the book and getting all the way through it.
I look
That
forward
is
to
the
your
show.
feedback.
This is In the Zone. My name is Eric Shine, and today's guest was Dennis Liu, and the book is Impeach the President, The Case Against Bush and Cheney. And I advise that you pick it up, not only read it, get through it, but also act upon it. Thank you.
Occupy our minds today.